Okay, so stuff that we've already talked about here, but things to think about when writing proofs. So a 2-column proof, you need to read the problem over carefully. Write down the information that is given to you because it will help you begin the problem. Also make note of the conclusion to be proved because that is the final step of your proof. This step helps reinforce that the problem is asking you to do and gives you the first and last steps of your proof. Draw an illustration of the problem to help you visualize what is given and what you want to prove if one is not given to you. Oftentimes, a diagram has already been drawn for you, but if not, make sure you draw an accurate illustration of the problem. Include marks that will help you see congruent angles, congruent segments, parallel lines, or other important details if necessary. Use the information given to help you deduce the preliminary steps of your proof. Every step must be shown, regardless of how trivial it appears to be. You guys often think there's so much stuff in proofs, but you have to make sure you use something. You have to state something so that you can define something else. That's what that's saying there. So beginning your proof with a good first step is essential to arriving at a correct conclusion. And use the conclusion or argument to be proven to help guide the statement you make. Remember to support your statements with reasons, which can include definitions, postulates, and theorems. So that's the way we've been doing it. A flowchart proof is write all the given pieces of information in individual boxes. Write what you are asked to prove in an individual box far below or to the right of your given. Draw an arrow from a box containing information to a new box containing the information that follows that statement. Write the theorem, definitions, or postulate that establish the piece of information underneath that statement or box. Draw arrows from the various pieces of information to a new box containing a conclusion that follows from their combination. Write the reason for this conclusion underneath the box and continue to draw arrows containing further information. If you have enough information, draw arrows to the conclusion and write underneath the conclusion box. So let's look at this. Here is a flowchart proof. So it says given that AB is congruent to DC. That's already marked, but I'm going to remark it on here. So AB is congruent to DC. And AC is congruent to BD. So this is a flowchart proof. I'm going to put my given information in this box here. So AB is congruent to DC. And underneath your reason states, so that's given. And my other reason is AC is congruent to DB. And that is also given. So right now we have a side and a side to prove two triangles congruent. Remember, there's multiple ways to prove triangles congruent, but you need 3 pieces of information, right? So you either can do side, 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 angle, angle, side, angle, or hypotenuse leg, which includes a right triangle, okay? So which one of those ways do you think we could use to prove this triangle congruent? What is another piece of information? So let's go through this step here. So we wrote down our given information, which is number 1, right? So number 2 says look at the diagram for the reflexive property, vertical angles, linear pairs, base angle theorem. Do we have any of those pieces of information going on here? Do we have the reflexive, vertical angles, any of that stuff going on here? Are you raising your hand?
Yes.
What do we know?
We could do the reflexive property for BC.
Right, but don't they share a side?
Yeah.
That's the reflexive property. So we can say that BC is congruent to BC by the reflexive property. And I'm going to mark that with 3 lines. Do we now have enough information? To prove the triangle congruent? Do we have 3 pieces of information that are legitimate postulates that we can use? What postulate can we use to prove these triangles congruent? Katie? So we're going to use side, side, side. So you have to write the triangle congruent statement correctly. So triangle what? Somebody raise their hand and tell me what triangle they want to start with. I'm going to just call on somebody if they don't raise their hand. Okay, Casey, triangle what? Give me one of the triangles. Okay, triangle BAC is congruent to what, Casey, there? You have to match up the right thing. So you went from B to A to C. So you went from 1 to 2. What did you say? Right, so you went from 1 to 2. So it's C, D, B. The order does matter. Are there questions there? Are there any questions there? So with a flowchart proof, these arrows tell you what pieces of information were used to prove this. We're saying that this side, and this side were used to prove that these two triangles are congruent. The nice thing about flowchart proofs is you know exactly what information follows from something else. That's one of the good things about flowchart proofs. That's the one thing I really like about flowchart proofs. I just don't like, to me it seems not as organized is what I have a panic attack about, but at the same time it's better in the sense that it really does tell you what flows from one thing to the next. Whereas in right, I know, I just used that word on purpose. Where in two-column proofs, you really don't know, you know that the information is above it, but where did it come from? Does that make sense? Has everybody got that? All right, so let's do a two-column proof next. So it says that AB is congruent to BC, so I'm going to mark that. And I'm going to write that down. And then it says D is the midpoint of AC. What do you know if D is the midpoint of AC? Somebody raise their hand and tell me what I know if D is the midpoint of AC. Katie?
AD is congruent to DC.
So I'm going to write D is the midpoint of AC. All right. So as Katie stated, and this is step 3. So steps 2 and 3 are kind of interchangeable here. So steps 2 and 3 can go out of order, but step 3 says to look to define any words. What word do we need to define in that given information? Olivia?
Midpoint.
We need to define midpoint. And we know, because that's the midpoint, that AD is congruent to DC by definition of midpoint. Okay, so we kind of skipped to step 3 there, and we defined the words that we needed to define. So let's go back up to step 2. Do we have the reflexive property, vertical angles, linear pairs, or the base angle theorem anywhere? Do we have any of those pieces of information? Logan?
Reflexive.
What side is congruent to what side then? It's congruent to? So they share BD. So BD is congruent to BD by the reflexive property. So let's look at this. We have a side, and another side. Is that enough information to prove triangles are congruent? Is that enough information to prove triangles congruent? Morgan, is side a postulate we can use? Okay, so tell me which triangle is congruent to which triangle then, Morgan? So you're starting with ABD. Okay, triangle ABD is congruent to what? CBD. So let's see if she followed that correctly. So she went from A to B, so she went from 1 to 3, and then she went from C to B, so she went 1 to 3, so that's perfect. Do you guys understand what I mean by 1 to 3 marks and stuff? Following that? And what is our reason there? Side, side, side. This one? You good? Okay. So it says C is the midpoint of AE. So if C is the midpoint of AE, that's this line here, what do we know? It may already be marked. What word was I trying to say there? What word was I trying to say there? But C is the midpoint of AE. That is given to us. So I'm going to write that here. What do we know because C is the midpoint of AE? Can somebody tell me what I know? What do I know? This is the midpoint of this line here. What do I know? What do I know? If it's in the middle of that line, what do you know? Harmony? AC is congruent to CE. So because of that, because we know that, AC is congruent to CE by what, Harmony? What's the reason for that? We just defined midpoint. This makes sense. So what we're saying is C is the midpoint of AE was given to us. Because we know this, we follow this arrow, right? Because we know this, we can say that these two things are congruent by that definition. Do you guys understand how that arrow works there? Do you guys see kind of how that works? So it does matter which one you put it in, because which one of these boxes here is going to be the proof statement? Which one do you think is going to be the proof statement? Top, this one, or the bottom one? The bottom one is going to be the proof one. So we can't go from here to here because this is being the proof one. Do you see how there's 3 arrows going into this statement here? And we need 3 pieces of information to prove triangles are congruent, right? So that's going to be our proof statement there. Okay, BC and DC are congruent, so those are marked there. That's just given to us, so I'm going to write that down. BC is congruent to DC. That's given to me. We can't conclude anything else from that. All right, so we've done step 3 and we've done step 1. So the next step is step 2. Are there reflexive property, vertical angles, linear pairs, or base angles theorem anywhere? Do we have any of those pieces of information? Yeah. We have vertical angles. So which 2 angles are congruent then? Somebody besides Helena. Which 2 angles are congruent by vertical angles? Which 2 angles are congruent, Greg?
BCA and DCE.
And it's important that you use 3 letters because C has multiple angles around it. So BCA is congruent to angle DCE, and that's by the vertical angle theorem. Okay, so at this point, we have a side here, and an angle over here. Is that enough information to prove triangles are congruent? We have 3 pieces of information to prove the triangle congruent. Okay, so which one is it then? Let's mark that angle congruent. Which one is it? Because angle side is not allowed. That's not what this is. Yeah. Do you see how the 2 sides form the angle? Do you see how the 2 sides form the angle? So that's the included angle. So it's side, angle, side. Devin, tell me the 2 triangles that are congruent. DCE and BCA. Good. Sorry, I was just making sure that you did it right. Okay, questions there so far? How are we doing? I feel as if triangle proofs are easier than the other proofs we've done. That doesn't mean that they're easy. I just said that they're easier. Does that make sense? So if they're still hard for you, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying I feel like they're a little bit easier than previous proofs we've done. Okay, so let's start here. It tells you that MP and RS are congruent. So I'm going to mark that. I can't define anything there, so I can't do anything else with that. So I'm just going to say NP and RS are congruent by the given information. Cannot define anything there. Then it tells me that NQ is congruent to SQ. Nothing to define in that statement either, so we have that given information, can't go any further. Notice that I am marking my diagram, and I see that some of you are marking your diagrams, but others of you aren't. It's really important that you're marking your diagram so that when you get to that proof statement, you can say, okay, this is side, angle, side, or this is side, 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 or angle, side, angle. It's easier to visually see it if it's marked in the diagram. Okay, finally it says that Q is the midpoint of PR. And that's given to us. What do I know because Q is the midpoint of PR? So Q is in the middle of PR. What do I know? Abby? PQ is congruent to QR. So why is that, Abby? Good. So Jill, why are these 2 triangles congruent? We have 3 sides marked, right? We have a side, side, and a side. So that's good. So What are my two triangles, EQ, that are congruent? NPQ, and what was the other one? Be careful. N to P is 1, to Q is 3. So you would have to go S to SRQ. There you go. Do you understand why I'm saying that? Okay. All right. Is that it? Let me get the homework out to you guys.